All right, welcome to the third episode of Q&A with Mitch and Jay. Our goal is to dig deeper, find more information about the questions that come from our community of athletes and coaches. So start us off, Mitch, what you got?
I do. We got a question from Miff, who's one of my favorite athletes here. She has a question about the mental game. So I know you take pride in this. So let's hear. I'd love to hear about mental toughness and mental strategies for pushing through hard things. The mental game is the hardest part for me, and I'm so grateful to have Mitchell to help me pull myself back together when I'm feeling fragile. Now, I didn't have to add the last part, but I wanted to get myself in there.
That's awesome. Okay, so this is something that I've thought a lot about, and just a practice in my own life for whatever reason. The way I'm wired is I will tackle like crazy hard projects. And one of the biggest and hardest projects I've ever done is this is a non-running example, but I'll bring it back. I built a pool in my backyard. I've never built a pool before. I dug the hole, and it is a functioning, working pool. And I want to tell a story about it real quick because it relates to hard things. So I was wiring the lights on my pool, and inside a conduit, so just a pipe, the wires went through this conduit, and I was going to cut the conduit and redo it a different way because I didn't like the way it looked. I accidentally forgot that I already put the wires through the conduit.
Okay.
So totally bonehead mistake, right?
Yeah.
Like idiot level mistake. I cut it, and my wife was there. I was so mean to myself.
Yeah.
Like I was distraught. I went over in the side of my yard and sat down with my hands in my face for like 5 minutes. Because now I've got to spend the next 2 hours fixing something that should have took 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Ryan actually told me a similar story. He sent me a picture of it. He tried to build a greenhouse.
I've seen the greenhouse. Yeah.
He tried to build a greenhouse and it didn't go so well. Like the wind blew it over.
Yeah.
And like, so the reason I bring up that stuff is like our tendency when we're faced with hard challenges is to be really hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
And we really beat ourselves up a lot. Mm-hmm. And the reality is we're mostly just like little kids still as adults.
Yeah.
And when you watch a little kid fail, they cry, they throw a temper tantrum. We do the same thing, but we do it in our heads.
Yeah.
And with running, with hard things, the biggest tip, we have to love ourselves.
Yeah.
And we've got to be kind to ourselves. Mm-hmm. We've got to show forgiveness. We've got to have patience. So my 2 words for the mental game are kindness and patience.
Awesome, man.
And the trick that I like to try and use is like, Mitchell, let's say if you had a bad race and you knew it was bad, I knew it was bad. The last thing I'm going to do to you is come up and tell you how bad you suck and you didn't try hard and you're terrible.
Yeah.
But that's what we tell ourselves in our own minds.
100%.
It's absolutely crazy. And so 100%. What I try to do with tough things is be kind to myself and be patient with myself and think about what would someone else say to me that loves me and cares for me. And then I try to say those things to myself. Now, you've got 10 minutes from me as a coach to you as an athlete. Hey, you got 10 minutes to be upset. And then you got to be nice to yourself after that. So I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that. That's been my 2 huge things that have helped me a ton.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's amazing that it's so much easier to be hard on yourself than it is to be like loving to yourself, you know? And I think a lot of, when I think when you're dealing with hard things, you got to separate into categories. One is like mandatory hard things. And one is like recreational hard things. Okay. Even if it's a big goal, like it's you don't have to do it. Okay. So I think separating those two things is important. Let's take the recreational one, because that's kind of what we're dealing with here is when you have a hard thing that's recreational, you got to, I have a saying I've been saying for a long time, you can't fake passion. Okay. So if you choose this really hard thing that a few people have done, or a few people you've ever heard of have done, or you're not even close to doing it, but it's a big goal that you want to reach, you've got to realize when you're choosing that goal that if you don't have the passion today and tomorrow and the next day and 3 weeks down the line, if there's not a burning obsession / passion inside of you, the odds of you getting there are very slim. The person who's passionate about the huge goal, the huge, whatever it is, can be ridiculous or just outside your comfort zone. The person who's passionate and obsessive with it and truly cares about it way beyond surface level is the person with a significantly higher chance of doing it. So I've put a lot, I used to do this thing and I do it still, but it's like when I have a big goal, I make it public. So I'm like hugely accountable, right? It helps that I don't have any social media because not many people know about it. But if I make a huge goal, I used to make a huge goal public, so I could be accountable for it. And then I get halfway there and realize like, oh, I actually don't care about it that much. Like this is a lot more effort than the effort to caring ratio has just disintegrated. So you have to have passion when you're coming up with those goals. And when you're on the start line and it's recreational, remember, and I told, when I helped Ryan with his canyon challenge, driving, taking the water jugs out of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
One thing I said to him that stuck with him as he told me was like, hey, remember that you chose to be here. Like you chose to be under pressure. You chose the goal. You chose the event. You chose everything you did in training to get to that point. And when you're at that point and you've chosen to be there and you have the passion, remember that there's probably only about 5 people in the world that even care that you're doing it. There's way less pressure from anyone else than there is from inside of you. You're running along these crowds, no one's watching you, no one's, there's your family, maybe a couple people in your family that are waiting to hear your result, and that's it. It's just you. So those are my things, like just having passion, taking responsibility for the choice that you made to get in that situation. And then also knowing, like, if you set a goal or if you're in a situation, it's just too hard, and you have that, like, that conflict of like, oh, I'm actually not this passionate about it. And you're like halfway to your goal. My thing was be like, if you really don't feel passionate about it, cut it, choose something else, be kind to yourself. Like, don't be sad about your goal that you've made public for the next 6 months just because you feel like you're accountable to other people, right? So those are kind of some thoughts that I go through.
That kind of ties together two different things. It ties together goal setting and that kindness and patience with yourself. So I'd say one more thing with that, the patience side of it for me is most of the time, in my experience anyway, we hit our goals about 6 months to a year later than we think we should.
Okay.
So you set a goal, it's a big goal. Like, you've got to be patient with it. It might take 6 months. If it's a huge goal, it might take 5 years.
Yeah, for sure. I've made silly goals in my day, right? Where I've thrown away everything I have and been in good situations, thrown away everything I had at the drop of a hat to pursue a ridiculous goal. Okay. And I spent 4 years trying to pursue this goal. and I was so close. I mean, within 500ths of a second close. Okay. And I didn't do it, but I put myself in that situation and committed everything to that goal. 2 days after I didn't accomplish the goal, I met the woman who is now my wife. So always keep in mind as well, though, just pushing towards a goal, just stepping out of your comfort zone leads to positive. Pushing endlessly towards a goal leads to positives. It's cliche to say like it's about the journey. The journey is the thing that is going to determine a undetermined prize, because you think you know the prize, which is like, oh, I want to hit this time, I want to qualify, but you don't know the prize because you might not get this prize, but the journey will lead you to somewhere. Maybe someone far away followed your journey. Maybe someone got motivated. Maybe someone saw you doing that and was like, wow, I didn't know that person had that much drive. Let me offer them this position, or let me talk to them about some stuff. That push with an undetermined, even though you think you know the end, you might not, but it is a positive thing, but you do have to be passionate about it, right?
Yeah. And the people that are positive usually get a lot farther than the ones that complain and are negative.
Yeah. Well, at least they're having a lot more fun too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay. So we had another question from an athlete about how to get better at some of the holistic 5 things. And our holistic 5 approach, we feel like, is viewing running more as a skill than just something that's physiology. But yeah, talk about a little bit about your thoughts on flipping that typical paradigm of I've got to get in better shape as a runner, and more to the lines of like, hey, running is a skill. Here are some things I can work on to improve that skill.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I've been thinking for a long time, 15, 20 years of my life, as these sports that I've gone in and out of, while running's always been a constant, moving in and out of high level sports. The only way to do that is look at the skill portion of these sports, because you're not going to be always be the most sort of physically gifted person in those sports or in a running race. So what I've always looked at is, if we look at, I was using this example earlier. If we look at jujitsu, right? You don't go to your first jujitsu class and they say, all right, let's see how hard and how fast you can do jujitsu. They break it down. They break it down in the skill, and you take it slow, and you learn where your hands goes, the positions, the contact points, the angles. And I feel like when people get into running, it's the complete opposite of most other movements that are taught, which is like, it's just, okay, go run, let's see what happens. And then let's just run more, and then let's see what happens after that. And then we'll get you running faster, and let's see what happens after that. And there's no real focus on like, okay, let's break these into skills. So the skill of running can be sort of compartmentalized into, okay, where's your foot landing? Where you pushing? What is your body and core position telling you? Like, do you have this solid sort of structure around you? Can you maintain a solid sort of trunk and hip structure while trying to produce force? Can you go forward with as few delays as possible, being up in the air, flicking feet, turning your body in ridiculous ways?
Hey, I've got one. I want to second that's changed for me mentally lately.
Yeah.
And it's, what do I believe about the ground?
Yeah.
And what I am supposed to do with the ground.
Yeah.
And it was some cues you gave me, just talking about like the difference between skating and like lightly touching the ground and like staying on top of the ground versus pushing through the ground.
Yeah.
And not and trusting my body's strength and not being afraid or like guarding an injury
Yeah, for
to
sure.
like prevent myself from pushing through the ground. That's a skill. That's a mental
Yeah.
belief about what my job is to do in relation to the ground.
Yeah, and as a runner, you can, when you've got the skill, running as a skill compartmentalized, putting force in the ground is a skill. That's one of the sections of running as a skill. Okay. And you could say, hey, I'm good at turning over. I'm good at my foot's in the right spot. I'm good at not wasting time or delaying. I'm not scared. How do I work on this subsection of running as a skill, which is force into the ground? And then you just look at the other part of the 1% that we would give, which is force into the ground, sort of running specific force into the ground strength work, but also sort of coordination. And you spoke about your relationship to the ground, which, when you go, even if you're on a rower, but if you're on like a paddle board, if you're on in a kayak, you have to figure out your relationship with the water. Because if you have no relationship with how the water moves beside you, how to grab the water and swimming with a catch position, or with, if you're on a paddleboard, how do you actually collect the water next to in the paddle and move it back, and then where does it slip through the water? It's the same thing. Everyone, it's always being taught like all these other movements are like skills, but running's just a thing. You got to just another skill, just you mentioned, what is your relationship to the ground? Because if you understand your relationship to the ground, you can then feel delays. You can feel
Yep.
when you're overstriding. You can feel when you hit the optimal. I remember when I was running the 400, I could feel when I hit when my foot hit the ground in the perfect position with the perfect force application, shin angle, everything just like elastically springing me forward. I felt it, right? And you can have that. You don't have to be sprinting to have that feeling, but that comes with practice of like, what is the ground doing underneath me based on my movements and body position, right? And then
one of the biggest things that flipped for me was saying to myself, I trust my body, I trust my legs, I trust that past injuries are past, and I don't have to hide from something. I can run smoothly and finish my push off and support my body. And then that brings more fluidity.
Yeah. And we spoke about that a little bit last time, just to like reiterate, is the biggest things that I see on form or injury analysis is, I see all the delays and the joint angles. That's the one thing. The biggest thing I could give someone is say, hey, why are you afraid of pushing through your big toe? And then it's just mind exploding. Like they're like, oh, because I had this injury 4 years ago, and I've just never got to the point like of trusting my big toe. And it's something that's not really thought of, but trust in your body and believing it's not going to break every step is like it's a huge step to healthy running, but also fast and smooth and fluid and everything. And as running as a skill and how it turns into the other sort of holistic 5, that skill can be taken, within athletics as a whole, or just, just your body operating correctly. You can look at the same thing for nutrition, so as running as a skill, as nutrition as a skill. To me, the biggest skill I've held for my whole life is the ability to assess my body through like movements or mobility or soft tissue work, and then self-treat my body through that's like one of my favorite skills. And that's a skill I can hold on to for the rest of my life. It's going to allow me to move in a healthy way. Is if I feel something, I have the skill to assess it and try and change it. And then go back to sort of moving healthy, or feeling it or not feeling it, or putting a putting a sort of degree of seriousness on whatever I feel. Because a lot of those aches and pains you feel, it's not even a big deal, right? So
and
anyway,
the
all
other
these
thing,
little skills tied together here.
the other thing about viewing running as a skill is once you view it that way mentally, it is something you can get better at. If you view it as a skill, it's not something that's outside of your control. It's not like vertical leap or you know, how many miles can I run? Like some of that's limitless. It has a limit to what you can do. But if you view it as a skill, you can get better at it. And then the other thing that's exciting to me as a coach is if I view it as a skill and we as Run Free coaches view it as a skill, it is teachable. So
for sure.
You can teach someone how to assess their body. You can teach someone how to view their food. Man, one of the nutrition skills that I've taken from Joe, our nutritionist, is she has a saying that food is fuel for performance. Like, so instead of viewing food as bad or, you know, something that I need to avoid to get to a certain weight, viewing it as fuel for performance just unlocks a whole nother level of skill to go to. Now I can view it as something I can perform better at, I can get better at. So I love that viewing as a skill.
And on the nutrition part, like all that's like that, you can dial that in as much as you want. But like you said, if it's viewed as a skill, it gives you this as a coach or as a sort of giving guidance. It's easy to sort of say, hey, this is a skill, you need to work on this. Same thing physically, where you're not just like, oh, you're just not built for this, you know? But on the nutrition side, I've got a quote, and the quote is, I've had abs and I've had pizza, and pizza's better.
That's awesome. Well, I'll say one more thing on the nutrition, and then we'll go to the question. I actually I've run at different weights, and I feel better and run better about 5 pounds heavier than what I can and am capable of getting to. Like I can get my weight down fairly low, but I run poorly. And I don't feel good. And that's, you know, man, I don't want to run better and feel bad. Like that doesn't sound like a sustainable life.
Hey, dude, you could break down all holistic fives into, it's about feeling better. Form, it's about feeling better. Nutrition, it's about feeling better. Mobility, soft tissue, make yourself feel better. As a recreational athlete, feeling horrible to accomplish this like little thing is,
it's not okay.
It might feel like you're like, oh, I'm just putting my foot down, I'm just cranking it, but you don't feel good. So it's like, you know, you might be on your way to try and accomplish something, you might get it, and sometimes it does take sacrifice, you're right. But again, back to what we said, like that sacrifice is like, if you have so much passion for something, you might get that and be okay with it not feeling good. That's 2%. The rest of it is, can you do stuff to feel better? And you'll be a better runner, better athlete, healthier movement if you feel better. So
100%. And then the mental side of it, if you're patient and kind with yourself,
you will feel better.
You're gonna feel better. If you beat yourself up and you have to have everything right now today, you're gonna feel worse.
I think what we're saying, Jay, is let's just chill. Let's just don't be so hard on yourself.
We got time for one more question. So this one's actually highlighting something we've all been through, and the thought process is, leading up to an event, leading up to a race, if I have to take 2 days off, or even if I take the day before a race off, or the day before a workout off, and I feel rusty. Let's just talk about that for a couple minutes.
Well, Jay, why don't you take it? Because you just told me you've had an experience where before races, you've like done nothing and felt great. So why don't you take that one?
I'll tell two specific stories that have happened to me as a 35-year-old and a 40-year-old. So when I was 35, I was trying to break 420 in the mile. I might have been 33, somewhere in there. And man, I like working. I like working in the shoe store. I love coaching athletes. I like doing a lot of different things. And sometimes that gets my running in trouble because I'll miss a day or miss a couple days. So I did this race several years ago. I barely ran the week of. I think I ran like 20 miles the week of. I worked all day and it was a night race. I drove to Tennessee. I got there 15 minutes before the race started, got out of the car, warmed up, and I ran like, for that year, I ran like a 4-second PR. I ran 4:18 for the mile as a mid-30s guy. And that was, I've always done little things like that. Now my training before that was spot on. I just ran into a bad week, the week of the race. A few months ago, I did, last year, actually, I did the Big Bear Half. Similar scenario. I was in good shape. I had something weird with my quad a week before. I barely ran. And then on race day, I felt amazing. And so part of that is like, what's going on inside my head is patience and kindness with myself. And I also have a little bit of cockiness and confidence. Like I believe I can do it because I've been doing this for 25 years. And so we were just talking about the fact that what's going on in your head a lot of the times is really what's determining whether you feel rusty or not.
And how many times have you tried to like nail a taper, just like you nail it to the finest detail, and you get to the race and you don't feel good at all? You know, like I've had that too. I wouldn't say it's like 50-50, but I think a lot of what we're looking at in tapers and just like pre-race stuff is mental games. I think a lot of it is mental. I think, obviously focusing on nutrition and sleep, I think that's like the main stuff. When you're focusing on running and you're like, oh, I hadn't run in the last 2 or 3 years. 2 or 3 days before the race, just because of unforeseen circumstances, but you've been running for 25 years of your life. It doesn't just make you rusty all of a sudden. You still know how to run. And then on that side where you were just talking about a race, you're talking about you knew that your preparation was on point. And that's the thing that's the most important thing for me in a race, in a taper, is am I going through this, whether it's 3, 5, 10-day tape, am I going through it wondering if I'm in shape, where I'm like trying to like add little things through the taper just to tweak it a little bit? Or am I just like in shape and I just need to not rest, but I just need to like maximize my energy, sort of my buildup of my energy for the race. And the other thing that you said, when you got to the line, well, I guess it's a question for you. When you got to that line, when you kind of had these unforeseen circumstances previous to the race, you knew you had put in the time. When you got to the line, how concerned were you?
Zero.
Zero. Because you're at the line. There's nothing you could do. You're there in whatever state you're in.
And this goes back to our skill thing. Like I've run enough races where there's just a skill there of believing, being confident, but not in like a dream, world, like not overly confident, but believing I can do it. And then the other thing I think with a taper, or if you do have a couple down days that are really down before a race, you might actually feel even better. In which case you also got to use all the tools you have, pace, how you feel, suggestion from your coach about how fast you should go out. Because I think a lot of the times what happens when someone says they were rusty is they actually get to the race, they feel pretty good, maybe even better than they've ever felt. And then they start out too fast. Because they had extra energy. And then they die.
That's true.
And they don't go into that race with a little bit of tiredness. And so they're not used to it and they mess their race up. So you do have to have some consciousness of pacing. And I think what happens sometimes is we panic and we go out too hard.
Yeah.
So it's not that we're overly confident. It's that we're underconfident and we're like, well, I better bank some seconds because that just doesn't work usually.
Yeah.
I mean, usually when you try to like cheat, you get caught.
Yeah.
And so for me, that confidence, like when I did that half marathon in Big Bear, I think I averaged 5:19 for the half marathon, but my first mile was 5:35.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
that was out of confidence.
Yeah.
That was out of confidence because I knew when I started, I was like, today's my day. I've got no need to run exactly even split. I'm going to come back later. And I was like, I just want to make absolutely sure that I don't run like 450. And then at mile 3, I'm standing on the side of the road.
Yeah. No,
but that was confidence.
It's funny. Ryan and I go on a lot of runs and adventures together. And there's parts where we just start hammering. We just decide, like, we'll see a ridge or we'll see a section of trail and we say, like, this is going to be 20 minutes of just hammering. Let's get this. And the thing that he's brought up to me, which is a very good way of looking, I've never seen it this way, is because I was a sprinter. In sprinting, if you feel really good or like too comfortable, if it feels like too easy, you like ratchet it up. Where if you're doing threshold, if you feel too easy or it feels easy, you should just leave it there.
Yeah.
Right. So like my constant pursuit of 1%. And I'm like, oh, this feels good. Let me see. Okay, it still feels good. And then and then once I'm at the limit, I'm like, well, I'm there now. I might as well just fly, right? So I think an interesting way of looking at that confidence that you were talking about was like, it comes to like with knowing your training, knowing your paces, but not putting so much of this emphasis on what happened the 2 days before the race or the 3 days before the race. And I think that's where confidence in training, and as Run Free coaches, we're always calling our athletes the week of the race to have a talk, to instill confidence, to remind them like, hey, you've done the training. This is your paces. You've done the training. You should be able to hold this, right? And letting them know, like, they have their whole pace race sort of set up before they go in the race. They've talked with their coach. They feel confident. And I think that's a huge part of us as coaches, getting the athlete to the line, is like having them confident in what they've done. Because only very rarely are they hitting a time that we've never even seen. That wasn't predicted from practice. I'll give a shout out to one of my athletes who's an absolute gamer, Tanner Jones, who like we train at this pace and he's good here, but he's such a gamer. He shows up at every race and just demolishes all training paces or predictability. And then we get back to training and he's just like, just right back at that level, but he's just like such a gamer. So anyway, shout out to Tanner there. But man,
right on with that. Like different athletes just operate different with that. I've coached some who are like incredible gamers. I'm not a gamer. I can do in practice basically what I can do in the race for the most part. And that's okay. Like you just need to know yourself, wherever you're at, you just need to know where you are, and then you're good.
Yeah. My favorite yoga quote, be where you are and stay there.
Yeah. Be where you be. Love it.
Vague yoga quotes. Okay.
All right. That's it. Hope you guys have a good day. Hit us up with questions.
Thanks, you guys. Bye. See you later.